What's up, guys? Welcome back to another album review. If you're new to the channel, my name's Rocco. I'm just a dude who reviews albums, usually in the hard rock, heavy metal, progressive rock, and jazz fusion genres. So, bringing a lot of variety into these reviews, hopefully. And usually I review classic albums, but I like to add a few modern albums in there as well in those genres. Hopefully, I'll do more of those in the future. But yeah, welcome aboard, welcome to the channel, and hopefully we can all have a great discussion, have a good fucking time talking about some classics, and today we're definitely going to be talking about a classic album. Uriah Heep's Very Heavy, Very Umble. And I think I have to say it in that accent based on the way the words are spelled out. It's a British band, and this album here is coming out in 1970. It's their debut album, and it's a classic album, guys, so strap on in. We're going to be talking about one of those timeless classics today. And it's interesting because Uriah Heep, it's a band that I've always known about. I always hear their name thrown out with the big three of proto-metal. That would be Zeppelin, Sabbath, and Deep Purple. And I probably should have mentioned Sabbath first because they're just undeniably the godfathers of heavy metal. But I also see Uriah Heep's name thrown in there as well. And for the longest fucking time, I've been putting off listening to this band. They've always been on my radar. I know they were very highly regarded, very highly influential, but for whatever reason, I never really got into them. That could be because they were never played on my local radio station. Again, back in the day, Q107 here in Toronto, if you guys are from Toronto, was a great fucking station. They would play all kinds of weird, obscure things. Fuck, I even heard them play the whole Atom Heart Mother Suite by Pink Floyd, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, it's a 24-minute instrumental orchestral piece. And but surprisingly enough, they never played Uriah Heep. These days, forget about it. Now that station sucks ass. They always play the same fucking songs every 2 seconds. But back in the day, they still didn't play Uriah Heep. So that just gives you an idea of how obscure this band is. And again, there's bands that are way more obscure than Uriah Heep. They did have some success, but compared to those big three, they were definitely more under the radar, more obscure. And I guess the lack of their radio presence on my local station just prevented me from ever getting into them. But they've been on my radar. Again, you can't really read about hard rock on the internet without their name coming across. And I noticed that a lot of the more progressive leaning fans, a lot of the prog fans, seem to really like Uriah Heep. So really, I'm a huge prog fan, as you guys probably know by now. And it's just really surprising how I just got into them now. But basically, I was watching one of my favorite YouTube reviewers, Pete Pardo. Got to give him a shout out. His channel, Sea of Tranquility. And he was mentioning his favorite. It's a fantastic video. It's like his favorite hard rock albums of the 70s. And he mentioned Uriah Heep was one of his all-time favorite bands. And when I heard that, I'm like, okay, that's it. I got to listen to these guys. So I planned a day. Me and my good friend, we were listening to music together online. And I said, why don't we listen to this album? Or it was one of the options that we were talking about listening to. And we ended up listening to it. And I was going into this album expecting it to be like a heavy, crushing proto-metal album like Sabbath's debut or In Rock by Deep Purple or something like that. But I was pleasantly surprised because there was so much variety, so much diversity on the album. Sure, it did have those heavy elements, but there was a lot of psychedelia as well, a lot of blues, a lot of softer, folkier moments, even some jazz-inspired things. And I definitely tasted the progressive flair that a lot of people were talking about with the, weird song structures and the time changes. And again, it's not like, I wouldn't call this a prog album, but it did have a lot of unconventional elements. And I was pleasantly surprised. I'm like, fuck, this is a great band. And of course, David Byron's fantastic vocals stood out to me right from the beginning. And, it was just a standout album. And since then, I've been listening to it nonstop. And I've also listened to the next album, Salisbury. I don't really know how you pronounce it. But that album there is just, holy fuck. That's going to be a great review to make because that album there is just completely different than this one and really shows him just diving off into the deep end of progressive rock. So, fantastic album. This one here, it's a little bit less experimental. Again, it borrows on a lot of those late 60s elements with the blues and the psychedelia. But it does have that pioneering sound, that heavy rock sound with the organ, more along the lines of what Deep Purple were doing at the time. But they definitely spiced it up. They spiced it up enough to have their own unique sound. So yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised. And, I just haven't been able to put this album down. It's so awesome. So we're going to be talking about Very Heavy, Very Umble, the debut from Uriah Heep. And without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the history behind this album. So Uriah Heep, guys, these guys here had a very unique history, very interesting, very long career. They're still going today. I couldn't believe how many studio albums these guys had, 24 under their belt. And they just had one of the most extensive and most interesting careers. A lot has happened since this album came out in 1970. Some for the better, some for the worse. A lot of tragedy. David Byron, the lead singer on this album, and probably their most iconic singer, he died in the mid '80s from an alcohol overdose or alcohol withdrawal seizures, one of those two. And it's just a sad story. It's just one of those sad rock tragedies. From reading up on this band, I found out that he had left the band a lot earlier than when he passed away. But it's still a tragedy because his voice, like listening to this guy, he had the potential to just, be recognized as one of the greatest rock singers of all time. But I think his untimely death in 1983 just cut off his career incredibly short. Horrible story. But anyway, guys, that's in the future. We're talking about Very Heavy, Very Umble. So we got to talk about what led up to the creation of this band and what led up to the creation of this album. So Uriah Heep was basically, they started off as a band called Spice, which was basically a band formed by guitarist Mick Box and David Garrick, who would later change his last name to David Byron, or, employ that as his stage name. Just probably sounds better. Byron, Garrick. I think Byron has a cooler edge to it. And these guys were basically the heart and soul of this band, Spice. They formed from an earlier band that Mick Box was in. And funny enough, David Byron, he would go up on stage sometimes after drinking a few pints of beer. And he had the balls to get up on stage with this band. Again, this was when they were a much smaller band, probably playing bars and things. I think 1967. So in the height of the whole psychedelic movement. And yeah, he would go on stage, sing a few tracks, and that's how the friendship started. So anyway, one night, Mick Box was talking to him. It's like, why don't you join the band? Your voice is fucking awesome. And David Byron wasn't wasted at that point, so he was kind of hesitant to do it. But he's like, well, you get up on stage when you're fucking wasted. You might as well do it now. And this was the point where David Byron, he wasn't like a full-blown alcoholic, but he was probably just enjoying a few pints in his youth. These guys would have been in their late teens, early 20s at the time. So this wasn't the problem period for him, which that would start much later in the mid 70s. So he joined the band as their singer, and they got this guy Paul Newton on bass, who ended up getting his dad to manage them. So that's pretty interesting. You don't hear that every day. The bass player's father managing the band. But then later on, they as they started playing more larger gigs, and they got to the marquee level in England, they attracted the attention of producer, let me read this so I don't forget, Gary Braun, who ended up signing them and taking them on as their manager. So Paul Newton's dad was kind of out of the picture at that point. There must have been some bitterness going on there. But Paul Newton stayed in the band as the bassist. And they got signed to Vertigo Records. So here Spice were. They were a young band poised to write and record their debut album. So that's just what they did. They went into the studio, started recording a few songs they'd been working on. And I think the two songs that made it from these early recording sessions onto the final product were Come Away Melinda and Set Your Sights, which are two fantastic songs, actually. But they definitely have a different feel than the rest of the album. But anyway, we'll get into that. But then some point at around this point, December 1969, they decided to change their name from Spice to Uriah Heep. And if you're anything like me, the first time you're getting into this band, you're probably thinking to yourself, what the fuck or who the fuck is Uriah Heep? Well, after some hardcore research, no, I'm just kidding. It's the first sentence on Wikipedia. Uriah Heep was this character from the Charles Dickens novel, David Copperfield. He was a devious little character. And at around this time, it was, I believe, the 100th anniversary of Charles Dickens. So, being in England at the time, that must have been all over the news, all over the media at the time. And they thought it was a cool name, so they picked that name for their band, and it's a great name, really stands out. And a saying of this character was very humble. He would always say that in the books and everything, so they took that as probably the inspiration for the name of this album, and the rest is history. So also at about this point, Mick Box and David Byron were like, you know what? We need fucking keyboards. Okay, they thought keyboards would be a great fit for their sound, and again, they were inspired by bands like Vanilla Fudge, which was a rock band that also incorporated a lot of that organ and keyboard sound. So they set out to find a keyboardist, and the first guy they got was a little guy by the name of Colin Wood. He was more of a session musician, but then he didn't really last long because Paul Newton recommended his good friend Ken Hensley. They played together in a previous band called The Gods. And yeah, they just got along great right off the start. Ken Hensley came in, and this guy really was the whole package. He had a great singing voice as well. He was a guitar player. He played a lot of session guitar, a lot of slide guitar, and he was a great keyboard player as well. So really, they really struck gold with Ken Hensley because he can really do it all. And funny enough, on later albums, he would actually sing a lot of lead vocals. And that's saying something given that David Byron had such a unique and powerful voice. But hey, what do you know? So Ken Hensley's in the band. So they pretty much re-recorded everything that they did with the other guy. I'm forgetting his name already. Colin Wood. And they set out to write some more songs with their new sound and their new organ player, Ken Hensley. So what do? They go to a community center and they start rehearsing. And what do you know? Deep fucking Purple of all bands is playing in the room next to them, and for a day there, I think it was just a day when they were rehearsing together, two worlds must have collided because here you have the two most prominent organ and hard rock bands, contemporaries, playing at the same time, and maybe they were feeding off each other, who knows? But that must have been a pretty legendary meeting. So they recorded a lot of the more well-known tracks on the album, Gypsy. I'll Keep Trying, That's It. That's the name of the track. So yeah, a lot of like the signature Uriah Heep sound came out from these new sessions with Ken Hensley. And again, at this point, he wasn't really writing any tracks. He was basically just, kind of playing the sideman here. He came kind of late into the recording process, but nonetheless, he did make a huge difference on this album. And later on, we'd all know that Ken Hensley would kind of try to take things over. He became their main songwriter and really put his influence, put his stamp on this band as probably the leader, even though he was one of the new guys that came into it. But yeah, on this album, he's kind of the sideman. But again, makes a big difference to the sound. Oh yeah, and another interesting thing. Somewhere along the lines, they got Nigel Olsson, who was the drummer from Elton John's band. And he played on a few tracks as well. The drumming situation is kind of weird. You'll probably notice I haven't really mentioned the drummer. They had this one guy, I can't really remember his name, but he didn't really stay in the band very long. Then they got Nigel Olsson to record. So again, with these multiple recording sessions, there's multiple different drummers on the album. So the album doesn't really have a strong drumming identity. I mean, you're not going to get like a fucking John Bonham on this album or an Ian Pace or something like that. The drumming's just, it's solid, it's there, but it's not phenomenal. And Nigel Olsson, before you know it, he had to go back off with Elton John and do his own thing there. So yeah, I found that pretty interesting as well. And so they released the album in, let's see here, June 13th, 1970, and in the UK. And, it got horrible reviews. I mean, this was not the music that people, or especially the critics, were into at the time. Again, Zeppelin, Sabbath, all those bands got absolutely slogged by the fucking critics. And in a famous review for this album by Rolling Stone magazine, one of the most hated magazines if you're a hard rock fan, said that the writer, I believe she was female, I forgot her name, I'm not going to give her any publicity here, but she said that she would rather kill herself than see this band become successful. So again, this music here was just so fresh, so up and coming, that the critics at the time just could not understand it. Again, they would change their tune later on to kind of fit with the commercial appeal of these bands. Like once Sabbath became big, once Zeppelin became big, they totally changed their opinion, those sneaky little fuckers. But at this point, this music was really rebellious, and this was really the thing at the time. This was like the underground. So, really interesting stuff there, guys. And a few little notes about the release of this album. The US edition, which came out a few months later, had the track Bird of Prey instead of the track Lucy Blues, which is a song that would actually appear on their next album, Salisbury. So when I first heard the album, and I caught wind of that, I was actually excited because Lucy Blues is by far my least favorite song on the album. And I thought, fuck, I'll just make a playlist, put in Bird of Prey. But then I found out Bird of Prey is the first track on Salisbury, so I ended up just keeping Lucy Blues in there. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Also, the album covers are different between the US and the UK release. If I had to pick, they're both really good. I would choose the UK release. It shows David Byron with his mouth open like this, covered in cobwebs. It's a really sinister, really dark album cover, which kind of fits the name. A very heavy, very humble. It gives it that heavy edge. The U.S. album cover is pretty cool as well. It's more artistic. It's a black and white drawing of this centipede creature. Pretty disturbing, actually. But yeah, I like both covers, but I got to give the edge to the UK version because that David Byron cobweb covered expression on his face, that look of shock, just really cool stuff right there. So yeah, guys, that's pretty much the history and the background behind the album. Now let me get into my overall review. We'll get into the nitty gritty. All right, guys. So right off the bat, with a title like "Very Heavy, Very Humble," you can't help but think that that was a mission statement. That these guys were hell-bent on bringing you the heaviest, the fastest, and the darkest music of its age. And again, being affiliated with Sabbath, Zeppelin, and Purple, that's what I was thinking. That's what I was getting into this album, thinking it was just going to be a barnstorming rocker from start to finish. Didn't read up anything on this album beforehand. And I was pleasantly surprised. Let's say it was like one of those albums. Let's say it was like In Rock Part 2 or Sabbath's Debut Part 2. Actually, then again, Sabbath was so unique that there's no way a band could have replicated that. But anyway, all that aside, let's say it was a barnstorming rocker from start to finish. I would have been happy. But I was even happier to find that this album has so much diversity. I mean, there are so many influences coming onto this album, and that could be a problem. Some people could look at it as unfocused, because it really is a smorgasbord of different types of tracks, and a few of the songs have that influential, heavy, classic, in-your-face Uriah Heep sound, the classic combination of the heavy organ sound and the heavy rock riffs, which again was more in the Deep Purple vein, songs like Gypsy, and I already mentioned We'll Keep Trying. Those songs there are just, again, epic, barnstorming, organ, and hard rock riff bass tunes. But there's so much more to this album than that. There's a lot of blues tracks as well. One's even a 12-bar blues song that, with the slide guitar playing of Ken Hensley coming in, it does give it that bluesy kind of feel. And there's a few beautiful psychedelic ballads. Set Your Sights and Come Away Melinda. Absolutely gorgeous, sweeping, relaxing, and I guess you can call it psychedelic, but that might be a stretch. So there's a lot of different types of songs on this album, and again, it gives it that diversity, and right from day one, this band was into that. They never wanted to play covers. And again, at the time, an up-and-coming band in the late 60s, you were pretty much expected to start off your live gigs playing a few covers, getting people in the mood, and then slowly transitioning into your own compositions. But Uriah Heep never wanted to do that. They always wanted to do something creative and do their own thing. And you could tell they were ambitious. Like, they knew that this album would have been hard to digest, given its different songs, different influences in the different songs. But they did it anyway, and they took a risk. And although it does feel like each song kind of takes on its own style, and it can seem a little bit unfocused at times, I think that they really needed to do this to progress into the band that they would become, where they were able to take all these different influences and different styles and incorporate them together in one track, which I think is really what they did on Salisbury. And again, that's what really makes people... I think that's what really makes the prog fans love this band. When they started doing stuff like that with Salisbury, combining all the different styles, they essentially became a progressive rock band by definition. They didn't have those long, epic, extended instrumental sections and virtuosity or anything like that. But by definition, by incorporating all those different styles, I would consider them a progressive rock band. But on this album here, as I mentioned, it's kind of like each individual song does its own kind of thing. And there are a few exceptions, like the song Dreammare comes to mind. That song there has the bluesy slide guitar with the heavy riffs in the background and the poppy psychedelic ensemble vocals. That's a pretty unique track. Not one of my favorites, but that's an example I can think of where they're really combining it all into one song. But really, I think what this album is known for are those really heavy, hard rock, proto-metal, organ and guitar duo tracks, those two tracks I mentioned. And then I think a lot of the fans consider the rest of the album to be considered filler and unfocused. But I really like those songs as well. So really, the album can be thought of as 1/4 barnstorming classic, that classic organ and hard rock duo that Deep Purple was known for. And the other 3/4 are a mix. You got your ballads. You got your just regular hard rock blues tunes. So really a cool mix. Your psychedelic, dreamier, dreamscape kind of songs, for lack of a better word. So really a good mix on the album. Now let's talk about the individual players on this album and what they bring to it. So first of all, you got Mick Box on guitar. And I think a key difference between this band and Deep Purple is the guitar playing. Mick Box, he does bring on those heavy riffs, but a little bit more subtle with the solos. You do get some pretty cool solos here and there, not on every single track. Whereas Richie Blackmore is just, we all know him as the guitar god. He was just showing off on every single song with his classical influence style and virtuosity. Mick Box is a little bit more grounded, and he likes to use the wah-wah pedal. I noticed that a lot, so pretty cool wah-wah solos. And later on Salisbury, I think his guitar playing improved a lot more memorable. On this album, he's kind of just doing his job, but he does it very well. Now, David Byron, okay, this guy has one of the most operatic, widest vocal ranges I ever heard in my life. Again, I'm basing that on Salisbury because he hits some incredibly high notes on that album, falsetto at points. And funny enough, he was a huge influence on Freddie Mercury, who we all know is just obviously one of the all-time greats. But you could definitely see that, especially with that next album. This album here, he does show his range, but he stays more in the middle range, more in the soulful, bluesier side of his vocals. But then when he gets to those ballads, you really hear that softer tone to his voice, almost sounding female at points, which is really cool. And that's where his range really shows. But on this album here, he kind of keeps in that middle range, that lower baritone range, sometimes almost sounding like a crooner, like one of those Frank Sinatra or, one of those kind of singers, which is pretty cool as well. But his vocals are definitely powerful, definitely fantastic, although they don't reach those crazy operatic heights that they do on later Uriah Heep albums. But still a fantastic job, and he probably still is the standout performer on the album for me. Bass playing's really solid as well, Paul Newton holding it down. Again, I noticed that he improves on the next album as well. And Ken Hensley's slide guitar playing is really cool. Oh, by the way, shout out to the YouTube channel, A Pocket Full of Heap, who actually brought it to my attention that Ken Hensley plays the slide guitar. Because there are a few songs where that's really, really prominent. And it gives it that bluesy flair. So shout out to him. He has some great videos. I recommend you check out his channel. A lot of great Uriah Heep videos. And yeah, finally, so Ken Hensley, he's playing the slide guitar. He does this heavy organ thing, really distorted at points. And really, that's the thing about the organ. You can make it sound like anything. You can distort it, make it sound extremely heavy. You could do a lot of soft and melodic things with it. And I really think that's why Uriah Heep really wanted to get the organ into their band, because there were just so many possibilities. And I really think the distortion on the organ is what really makes it work as a hard rock instrument. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Organ, especially Hammond organ to be exact, in hard rock music is a match made in heaven. I mean, it fits so fucking well together. I feel like more bands should have been doing this, not just Deep Purple and Uriah Heep and Lucifer's Friend and bands like that. I feel like so many more bands should have incorporated this because it goes so well together. And again, Ken Hensley does a fantastic job with that. Later on, they would kind of develop this core Uriah Heep sound. And again, I mentioned that Uriah Heep was a mishmash of many influences, and that might be like really their defining feature might be that they combined all these different influences into one. But I would say the core Uriah Heep sound that I've been hearing from like later albums, including Salisbury, is the combination of that Hammond organ, the hard rock guitar, the wah-wah guitar, I should be specific. Mick Box really likes using the wah-wah pedal, and those two things in particular combined give them that unique kind of sound. But most of all, the vocal harmonies, guys. I mentioned David Byron, how his vocals are a little bit on the mid-range on this album, but he does get into the soft side as well. But you got to mention the vocal harmonies. I mean, so many rock bands, especially hard rock bands, they kind of pass off on the vocal harmonies. Queen is a good counterexample, and that's why I think this band here must have been a huge influence on Queen, because not only does Freddie Mercury's falsetto vocals and operatic range kind of take from David Byron a bit. Obviously, like, I'm not saying David Byron caused Freddie Mercury to sing in that style. You can't just be influenced to sing at the level of Freddie Mercury. That's a God-given talent right there. But I am saying that to incorporate that into a hard rock kind of frame of reference probably did come from Uriah Heep. And again, with the vocal harmonies, that Queen must have taken a huge inspiration from that as well. So really, that's their core sound, if I had to summarize it. The vocal harmonies combined with the Hammond organ, wah-wah guitar, and just insane vocals by David Byron. And I was reading an interview where Mick Box said that the harmonization in their vocals really came from the fact that there were like 3 or 4 strong singers in the band. Again, Ken Hensley at this point. Um, I mentioned he would later go on to like sing lead vocals on some certain songs, but with a strong voice like that, it just lends you. It just leads into it just naturally leads down the progression of doing vocal harmonies. And I think that's also what gives it the psychedelic effect. A lot of those bands of the 60s were doing a lot of that harmonization. And I've even heard this band being referenced as the hard rock Beach Boys for that reason. But yeah, really cool. And again, on this album, there is some harmonization. It's still in its infancy, but it's there. So again, a lot of those elements that Uriah Heep would later take and take to the next level on their future albums to create their core sound. So in conclusion, guys, this album here, it's just, I'd say this is like the proto Uriah Heep, because we do have those songs that would later be extremely influential, but then you have a few of those other tracks as well that are just a little spotty here and there, different styles and everything. So great album overall, a really enjoyable listening experience. If I had to mention one thing, it would be that the track listing on side 1. It could have been fixed a bit, because you get these 2 slow burning tracks finishing side 1 after the extremely energetic intro, and it kind of like takes away a little bit of the the edge of the album. I feel like those last 2 tracks on side 1 should have been more spaced apart, just to prevent you from getting like listeners fatigue from like the more mellow stuff. But overall, it's a minor complaint, and it's a fantastic album. So now let's talk about it track by track.
Only 17, I fell in love with a gypsy queen. She told me.
What an absolutely iconic and raging opener, guys. Track number 1, a little song called Gypsy, probably the most well-known song from the album, the most representative of Uriah Heep's general sound, the heaviest, the most pummeling, and a lot of fan favorites. I've seen a lot of people put this pretty high up on their Uriah Heep top songs list. And this song here, it is fantastic. I will give them that. It might not be my absolute favorite song on the album, but it's definitely the most in line with Uriah Heep's classic sound, and just really the opener that this album really needed. Again, when I mentioned that this album's called Very Heavy, Very Umble, getting into it, this is the kind of song I was expecting. Then after this, in the next track, when it went off into all that weird territory, that's when I started getting intrigued. But as far as this song goes, it's exactly what you would expect from a band like Uriah Heep in the big 4 of proto-metal songs. I mean, this song is absolutely crushing, absolutely heavy, but it has all of those classic Uriah Heep moments. It's got the vocal harmonization, it's got the organ solos, doesn't really have any wah-wah guitars, so that's kind of a main difference from like their classic sound. But overall, it's just really the whole package. The song's about 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes, around there. So a pretty lengthy track. And really the whole centerpiece of this song is Ken Hensley's incredible organ solo in the middle. I mean, for the new guy, for a guy that wasn't writing much at the time, just kind of stepped in, laid down some organ parts. Holy fuck. Like, he totally takes over this track. But Mick Box's incredibly heavy, chugging, and dare I say even doomy main riff of this track really holds it down, really grounds it, and gives it that heavy metal ferocity. So really so much to love about this song. We'll take it from the top. So starting off, it opens with this heavy, distorted Hammond organ riff, which is the first thing you hear on the album. So really fitting for a band that really brought that Hammond organ to the forefront. And then the guitar comes in and kind of follows suit, mirroring that riff. You get a lot of like this stop and start action going on, and it really just builds the element of tension and suspense. Like, you really don't know what's happening, but when the song kind of stops and starts like that, it gives you that feeling of, oh my god, guys, something amazing's about to happen. And then all of a sudden the guitar and the keyboards intensify, some pretty rapid fire unisons there between the two, before diving into one of the heaviest chugging riffs of the time. Like, this is Black Sabbath level riffing, and by far the heaviest riff on the album. Hell, the heaviest riff I've heard from Uriah Heep so far. But again, keep in mind, I've only heard this and Salisbury. And it's just fucking absolutely a headbanger, guys. The bang, bang, It's really simple, but it really gets the job done. And the Hammond organ mirroring that gives it that added level of complexity. So really cool. Then all of a sudden, the song stops and we get David Byron's vocals. And I love how the riff kind of goes in and out between the verses. Like during the verse, we just get the organ kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Enhancing David Byron's vocals. But then after the verse, it dives right back into that riff and so on and so forth. It just kind of keeps repeating the pattern. And David Byron, I mean, this is probably, I love the softer performances on the album, but of the heavier, more intense, more melodramatic performances, this one's got to be the best. His vocals are absolutely passionate on this song and it really comes across. The lyrics are pretty cool as well. Just about a dude falls in love with a gypsy, gets fucking abused and tortured by the gypsy's father. All kinds of crazy shit like that. Pretty funny, but also a pretty dark and ominous track in terms of the lyrics. But yeah, David Byron's vocals are absolutely fantastic and passionate. And just the way the whole music kind of stops except for that keyboard during his vocal section really gives his vocals that enhancement effect. And then we get the harmonization with the whole band just screaming at the top of their lungs. Again, gives it that epic vibe. Really cool. So we get the harmonization on this album right off the bat. Now, here's where the song gets fucking awesome. Oh, it was already awesome, but you know what I mean. The whole band gets into this crazy jam session, and Mick Box is really holding it down, just repeating that riff as basically the bedrock or the backbone of the song. But then over that, Ken Hensley does this incredible, eccentric, in-your-face organ solo, and this part goes on for a while, I think about 2 minutes or so, and it gets so intense. And again, with that chugging riff in the background, holding it down, it really gives it that heavy foundation where Ken Hensley could just go crazy over that and really pour his heart out on those organs. So awesome solo. Then at the 4-minute mark, we got some progressive rock leanings coming in. The whole song just suddenly stops. So unexpected time change right there. And we get this creepy keyboard section. This part here, looking at the album cover and hearing this creepy keyboard section here. Again, no other instruments, just Ken Hensley on the keyboard. It fits perfectly. I mean, that is the perfect musical representation of the darkness of the album cover. And it's really ominous, really interesting. But then before you know it, it kicks back into that main riff, and the guitar. There's some crazy guitar licks, and David Byron comes back in. Ending off the song, we get this weird psychedelic kind of freak out, which I feel could have been left off. It's not really that necessary, but it does give the whole song this climactic feel before ending off with that high-pitched harmonization. Just ending off the song on a very high note, literally. And that's the song. So lots going on here, but really Ken Hensley steals the show, and it's just an epic song. Definitely one of the best songs on the album. I would give this one a 9, probably to a 9.5 out of 10. I wouldn't quite give it a 10 out of 10 because it's not one of my favorite hard rock songs of all time, but it's definitely up there. So yeah, opening track Gypsy, easily a 9.5 out of 10.
Walking in your shadow ever since you went away, yeah. And the clock on the wall really hasn't very much to say.
So track number 2, Walking in Your Shadow. A really good song. Really like this one, guys. I don't love it. It doesn't have that wow factor that Gypsy had, but it's a solid hard rock track that gets the job done. And it's an enjoyable listen every single time. Unlike Gypsy, I don't think this song has any organ whatsoever, so definitely a big contrast in the sound. Or if it does have organ, it's probably very minimal and in the background, but I really don't think there is any organ on it. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, the track here, it's a pretty good hard rock tune. It has this riff that runs throughout it. It's pretty heavy. It's pretty slow and chugging. But unlike the Gypsy riff, it doesn't have that heavy distortion, that heavy grind, that heavy drive that riff had. So it's not as, I wouldn't say it's as heavy as that riff. But when I listened to it, I couldn't help but think of the riff, The Rover by Led Zeppelin, which is one of my all-time favorite riffs. Now, I'm not saying these riffs are like the same in any way, but it does give you that vibe with its sleazy, kind of swanky feel to it. I don't know, that was the first thing that popped into mind. So pretty good riff. The rest of the song's pretty cool as well. I love how the riff stops when David Byron comes in and the drums kind of just build up as he's singing these verses. Really great vocals on the track as well. They bring in the harmonies later on at the tail end of the verses. So pretty cool stuff there. There's a nice bluesy guitar solo in the middle. Nothing to blow your mind, nothing like Richie Blackmore or anything, but again, it gets the job done. And there's a few nice little folky interludes in the middle with those harmonization vocals. So really cool. At least they had the harmonization on this track, even though they didn't have the organ. So I really love it. Can't really think of anything else to say about it. It's just a cool track with some nice variation with the folky laid back bits in the middle. Nice one. I would give this one an 8.5 out of 10.
There were lots of little girls like you before they had the war. Oh, Daddy, Daddy, come and see. Daddy, hurry, do.
Now this track I absolutely love from the bottom of my heart. Come Away, Melinda. And this was the first song on the album that really took me by surprise. It's nothing, absolutely nothing like the previous two tracks. It's soft, melancholic, really shows that the band had a lot of restraint. And most of all, it's emotional. It builds gradually throughout. And honestly, I gotta say, it's one of the best rock ballads I've ever heard in my life. I wouldn't even call this rock. It's just one of the best ballads. And I was intrigued to find out that this is actually a cover. I forgot who the writer was, but it was originally sung by the singer Henry Belafontaine. So immediately I had to go and check that version out. And this version just totally trumps it. I mean, the emotion you feel during this song is fucking incredible. And I really think this song here is what really showed that Uriah Heep was a band with all kinds of different influences. And they were able to really show that their sound had a perfect balance between the light and shade. This song obviously being the light. Now, when I say this song's light, I mean musically. Lyrically, it's actually a pretty heavy track. It deals with a little girl discovering a photo album that her family had before the war. Unfortunately, her mother passed away in the war, and all of her brothers and sisters. And she's sitting down asking her father, like, who are all these people? Like, who are all these little Melinda girls? And the father says, he just bluntly tells her, like, that those were the brothers and sisters you had before the war. That was your mom before the war. And immediately, like, the song doesn't really... By the end of the song, you start realizing what the song's actually about. But it just starts off, and you're thinking, oh, it's kind of childish. It's from the perspective of a child. But then when that sinks in, it really hits you emotionally. And David Byron, holy fuck, guys. His vocals are absolutely fantastic on this song. They're just swelling with emotion. So soft, so velvety. Almost female-like at some points. And, fuck, man. He sounds like one of those crooners from the 50s. But better. Like, giving it a more sincere impersonation. And I guess that's because he's singing it from the perspective of the little girl. You have to give it that kind of, that childish, soft, velvety nature to it. But even when he sings from the father's perspective, it's fantastic as well. Like he does up the ante a little bit with those vocals, but overall still pretty soft and velvety. And I love how the song just gradually builds throughout. It just starts off very simplistic with this flute sounding keyboard effect and this ominous and haunting guitar. That's another thing. The song is very haunting, and that acoustic guitar in the background definitely gives it that vibe. But then the mellotron comes in, played by Ken Hensley, giving it that violin orchestral kind of feel. And then the whole band comes in with their harmonized vocals. When that part right there, just, oh man, I get goosebumps every single time. And just fucking fantastic. Really shows David Byron's range. Couldn't believe this was the same singer. Especially at the end where he sings, before they had the war. Just shows that this guy can go from baritone to falsetto, just his range is amazing. But overall, this song here is just a really emotional ballad, one of the best, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. At 3.5 minutes, it's the perfect length, and totally trumps any of the other versions of this track that I've heard. It's just by far the superior version. And again, Uriah Heep wasn't a band to do covers, but when they did, as in this case, they totally made it their own, totally improved it. So yeah, fantastic cover. Easily a 9 out of 10. Maybe one day it'll be a 9.5 if it grows on me even more. But right now, I'd give it a solid 9.
When you went away. Oh, yeah.
closing out side one, we get another track on the album that sounds absolutely like nothing that came before it, Lucy Blues. But unlike Come Away Melinda, this one here just doesn't pay off. It's by far my least favorite song on the album. And basically what it is, it's a 5-minute and 10-second slow-burning, plodding blues tune. Not a heavy blues tune, not like something in Zeppelin's vein, but just a simple, plodding 12-bar blues song. It's okay. It's like drenched in organ. It's got some pretty simplistic riffs going throughout the entire song. The star of the show here is definitely David Byron. I mean, you could tell that he's really using the more soulful, bluesier range of his voice, which is really good. He even kind of sounds like Robert Plant at one point, singing, "Baby, baby, baby, baby." That must have been an obvious influence from Robert Plant. I mean, there's no way that was definitely intentional, is what I'm trying to say. But overall, this track here just overstays its welcome by a lot. It's 5 minutes in length, and coming after the ballad Come Away Melinda, which is fantastic. You really don't want another slow-burning, plodding, trudging song like this. You really need something to spice it up, to really bring the momentum back to that first song, Gypsy, and even the second track. And this song was not the one to do it. So if anything, they probably should have left this track off the album. It's really just a simple blues song. Again, some cool organ. There's a cool organ solo in the middle, but it just doesn't have that wow factor, doesn't have that intensity, and doesn't really add anything to like the band's sound. So Lucy Blues, I mean, I don't know, what would I give this out of 10? I mean, it's good if you look at it in isolation, but on the album, that definitely plays into it. So for that reason alone, I would give this a 7 to a 7.5. As a standalone track, probably a 7.5 would be more fair than that. But right now, I'm just going to give it that lower range because of how it fits onto the album, which is definitely a factor when rating songs. So yeah, that's Lucy Blues. So flipping the album to side 2, what do we get? We get Dreammare. And the first time I heard this song title, I was puzzled. I'm like, why not just call it fucking Nightmare? But anyway, that's besides the point. This is a great song, guys. On first listen to this album, this didn't really stand out as one of the greatest for me. But on multiple listens, this is definitely like in the upper echelon, like definitely in the top 4 songs on the album, I would say, or maybe the top 5. It's just a really unique song. And I think what makes this track is that it really combines everything on this album, like really, like literally everything on this album. It's got the heavy chugging riffs that we heard in Gypsy. It's got the organ in the beginning. It's got the harmonization throughout the entire track, and it's got the bluesy elements like the slide guitar playing by Ken Hensley, and all that jazz. So really, this song here is a distillation of everything. Now, the only thing that prevents this from being one of my absolute favorite tracks on the album is I do love the harmonization. The main verses are actually harmonized. So before, when there was harmonization, it was more of the choruses or just like little parts in between. But this whole song here is sung with using ensemble harmonization. And I love it. But the only thing is when they start singing la 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 la, I like how it gives the song that commercial kind of vibe, but I think it's just repeated way too much throughout the entire track, especially at the end where the whole song just cuts out full stop. And we get those vocals. Then the instruments come back in, and it becomes like this cacophony of la la la's and slide guitar and heavy guitar riffs, which is really cool. But I feel that la 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 part is just repeated a little bit too much. Just leaves a little bit of a bitter taste in the back of my throat. Just a little bit, just a minor bitter taste. But overall, the song's fantastic, and I love how it just starts off with this absolutely epic intro, starting with the organ, and then the guitar comes crashing in, and it has this triumphant kind of feel with the wailing guitar with the bam 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 bam. You feel like, holy shit, something crazy is about to happen. And then the rest of the song doesn't really match that intensity, but it's still a fantastic intro. And then all of a sudden the thing stops. We get that heavy chugging riff, something like that would have been on the first track, Gypsy. Really heavy, really crushing. But with those harmonized vocals and the slide guitar playing on top of that, it gives it this bluesy commercial edge to it, which is really cool, really interesting. You have those 3 elements kind of clashing, but in a good way. They all work so well together. And I really love that. It's such a unique sound. Really, not many bands combine slide guitar, heavy metal guitar playing, and harmonization together. This is one of the only songs I could think of, and it's really good for that. Just those la la las just leave a bitter taste in my mouth. So for that reason, I'm not going to give this like an extremely high score, like a 9.5 or something, but it's definitely an 8.5 to a 9, just for sheer creativity and awesomeness in general. So great song. Now this song is absolutely groovy as fuck. Real turned on. This one here is just this bluesy, hard rock, chugging song that it's just so groovy, guys. Like, you can't help but headbang to it. And I think this would have been the perfect choice to put right after Come Away Melinda instead of Lucy Blues. It would have given it that contrast. But overall, this song really does pack a punch. And there's no organ in sight. But unlike Walking in Your Shadow, this one here is a lot heavier, a lot bluesier. Again, just like the song that came before, Ken Hensley's all over this track with his slide guitar playing. But the main riff, the main chugging riff in the background is what really keeps me interested. It's just so fucking groovy, guys. And this song really is a guitar showcase. In the middle, there's this lengthy Mick Box guitar solo. And at one point, they have the multi-tracking of the guitars that gives it that twin guitar effect. Kind of sounds like the Allman Brothers. Has that southern rock kind of vibe to it. Just great. And then finally, it intensifies after that part, finishing off. And then David Byron comes back in. A lot of attitude, a lot of power to his vocals on this track. And I love how the song kind of has this false ending where he says, "Got me real turned," and then you would expect him to say "on," but then this guitar comes in, and the feedback, I swear to God, guys, the feedback coming out of this guitar sounds like the word "on," which is genius if that was intentional. Or maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But then after that guitar feedback freak out, he does actually come back in and shout "on," just ending the song with this gritty punch. So I really like Real Turned On. It's one of the more upbeat tracks on the album. I wouldn't really call this like a heavy metal barnstorming tune like Gypsy, but because it does have that bluesier edge with the slide guitar, which is another big highlight of the track. You know, I don't want to give Mick Box all the credit. Ken Hensley is integral to the sound of this track, and fantastic playing. But yeah, it's just a really guitar-oriented track, without it being like classified as heavy metal. So really good one. I would give this one, just like Dreammare, probably an 8.5 to a 9 out of 10, somewhere in that range.
Took me quite a time to see the disguise, made it very hard to tell. Now here you are again, but you're begging in vain, 'cause I really don't want to know.
Coming up next, we get I'll Keep On Trying, which is bar none one of the best tracks on the album. If not the second best, then it definitely in the top 3, right up there with Gypsy and the next track on the album, which I'll talk about. This is a huge fucking highlight for me, and I freaking love it. It's definitely a hard rock masterpiece. Just like Gypsy, I feel like this is the successor of that song. It really brings back that heavy, crushing riff and organ unison, which is awesome. And I would say this is probably the most progressive song on the album. So many different time signature changes throughout, even in the first minute alone. There are enough changes to make even a band like Yes jealous of these guys. I mean, seriously, such a fantastic song. And it has so many unique features about it, so many unique qualities. And, oh my God, I'm going to gush about this track because I love it that much. Let's just take it from the top. So it opens up with this absolutely creepy organ and heavy, doomy guitar riff. And then before you know it, these falsetto, operatic, harmonized vocals come in with the It gives it this weird, creepy, ominous vibe. And sorry, I couldn't resist singing that, by the way. I'm sorry, guys. Fucking incredible. It gives that song that unique flavor, and that's repeated multiple times throughout the song, giving it this creepy, haunting atmosphere. But before you know, we get into this really energetic and fast-paced riff, just full of anxiety, full of tension, full of intensity, and it's probably the fastest paced riff on the album. So far, they've all been kind of slow burning, dirgy, doomy kind of riffs. This one here is actually fast and chaotic, which must have influenced a lot of bands at the time. And, that's another thing that differentiates this band from Deep Purple. Deep Purple really did have those fast paced riffs, whereas these guys kept it more on like the sludgy kind of heavier side. So that's another difference now that I mention it. But before we get into another heavy-ass riff, and the whole song kind of just goes into the verses. David Byron gives a fantastic vocal performance, and right after the verse, we get those crazy leads again, the harmonization. It's incredible. And the organ is accompanying that heavy riff. So again, that's why I compare this song to Gypsy, because it's really that unison between the two. But before you know it, my favorite part of the entire fucking song comes in. The song just drastically changes, a crazy tempo shift to a slow and melodic section of the song. But it gradually builds up, and you got this beautiful piano in the background. And this part here is just so uplifting, so motivational. I don't know what to say. It's just so unexpected coming after such a bombastic intro with those heavy riffs and those crazy falsetto vocals. It's just fantastic. And David Byron's definitely the star of the show. His vocals just get more and more emotional as they go on. Again, he's bringing back that crooner kind of voice that we kind of heard on Melinda, but with more of an edge to it. And it just keeps building up with that sunny organ playing in the background. And he's talking about how, he could always keep on trying, and he could buy another day. Things like that, which are really emotional, knowing the tragedy behind David Byron and how he was never able to buy himself another day. That chokes me up every time just thinking about it. But it's such a cool, unexpected, laid back, yet energetic and triumphant sounding part of the song. Just absolutely incredible. One of the best parts of the song. Then before you know it, it leads right into this amazing Mick Box solo, by far the best guitar solo on the album, using his signature wah-wah pedal. And it's intense, it's groovy, it's got the bass chugging in the background. That's another thing I should mention. There's some great bass lines on this song, definitely the bass highlight of the whole album. And it's just fantastic. And the solo starts off like a guitar siren that really gets your attention, but then it gets really groovy and really fucking with the wah-wah pedal. You can't help but headbang to it. Breaks off into the original theme of the song with the verses, the heavy riff, and then finally ends off with that fast, intense riff from the intro, really closing out the song on a bang. So really, I'll Keep On Trying is a straight-up masterpiece, easily a 9.5 out of 10. One of the best songs on the album, if not the best. So many time changes. It's got so many unique features, as I already mentioned, and I freaking love it. So that's I'll Keep On Trying.
Wake up, set your sights for never.
Closing off the album, guys, they end on one of the absolute highlights. Wake up, set your sights. And as I mentioned earlier in the review, this song and Come Away Melinda were recorded when they were still known as Spice. So this is one of the really early tracks. And, it really shows, but in a good way. It sounds nothing like the other songs in the album. There's nothing really heavy about this song whatsoever, but it's still fantastic. And it really shows like their early influences coming in with the whole psychedelic movement, especially the second half of the track. But really, this song here, it's a tale of two halves. The first half, both halves are fantastic, but it's the second half that just keeps me coming back to this track. It's just absolutely haunting, absolutely beautiful. But the first half is fantastic as well. So let's talk about that. So first of all, I know I feel like I'm saying this on every single song, but David Byron's vocals steal the fucking show. This song here in particular is probably my favorite vocal performance by him on the whole album. Again, he's using more of that like 50s crooner, more baritone voice on the song, but he gives it so much passion and so much flair that you can't help but smile at the enthusiasm this guy has. Like, he doesn't have to sing at the top of his lungs, high-pitched notes to really get that passion and drive across, because he does it perfectly on this track. And this song here, it's a huge contrast to the other ones. It's upbeat, but yet not heavy. There isn't any distortion in the riffs. There isn't any heavy organ. It's more jazzy, more piano-driven, which is really cool. And really supports David Byron's vocals perfectly. It even gets pretty frantic at the end with all kinds of crazy piano and guitar licks coming in. And some pretty frantic drumming as well. I don't really know what the song's about, but I'm thinking it's about war or something like that. It's an anti-war song. But some absolutely passionate vocals by David Byron, and very jazzy, very loose feel in contrast to the heaviness of the whole album that preceded it. So awesome contrast. Now here's where things get amazing. At the 3-minute mark, the song gets into this fantastic dreamscape. You got Mellotron, you got this beautiful hypnotic guitar strumming, and David Byron just beautifully singing in the background with a lot of la-la-las and a lot of basically scat singing, but just beautiful, giving it this soft edge. And I can't help but think of King Crimson, because this subtle, understated, almost muted guitar solo comes in with that Mellotron in the background. You can't help but think of something off In the Court of the Crimson King or something like that. So really showing their influences there. But it's beautiful. And then when David Byron comes back in, his vocals just send shivers up and down my spine. His voice is so soft, beautiful, melodic, and velvety. When I listen to this with my friend, he's like, is this a woman? Is this like someone guest singing on the album? But no, it's David Byron. And it's just a fantastic, laid-back, 3-minute, just one of the most beautiful moments on the entire album. Right up there with Come Away Melinda. But this one here, you just literally just sit back and zone out to, which is great after those intense songs that just came before it. So Wake Up, Set Your Sights, 9.5 out of 10, hands down, one of the best. Sometimes I do consider this my favorite song on the album just because of how strong the outro is. But really, it's debatable. It's definitely between this, Gypsy, and I'll Keep Trying. Those three are like the holy trinity. And that concludes the album, guys. That was the last song. Wow, what a fantastic album. You know, I really love the diversity on this album. I know I've said that many, many times, but really I think that's what gives it its strong character to it. And I love how unpredictable this album is. And I think you will too. If you're a progressive rock fan, you're really going to love the variety and the contrast and what it demands of you as a listener. You know, really is an easy listen. You have to be able to shift between these different genres and different moods at the drop of a hat. So very heavy, very humble. Was a very heavy but not very humble start to their career, because these guys were just had a mission statement with this album, and they would later progress into their signature sound on the next album. So Uriah Heep, classic album. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of their albums. So comment down below, tell me about them, tell me your opinion on this album. And again, just want to give a shout out to Pocket Full of Heep, great channel that really made me realize that Ken Hensley was playing all that slide guitar. I would have easily have fucked that up if I didn't do some more research and just said it was Mick Box. So thank you very much. And as always, guys, take care and stay tuned for more videos.